Hello, I'm Robert Lomas, and this is the 13th of 17 episodes of a work called 10 Nights in the Black Lion, which was written by the novelist Daniel Owen in 1859. It was originally written as a serial in the magazine called Charles of Bala, which had been produced by his friend Nathaniel Jones, but was now edited by John Davis. This 13th episode was published on September the 8th, 1859. Once again, this episode lacked speech punctuation, but this time the previously anonymous author had signed himself, and he'd signed himself Glaslewin, which is Daniel Owen's bardic name. Episode 13, The Seventh Evening. By this time, I was beginning to feel the situation at Cedarville was getting desperate. I couldn't help sensing a strong feeling of insincerity on the part of some of those Black Lion regulars and their families. From the beginning, the fate of Willie Hammond had given me a sense of foreboding, even though his mother's unwelcome appearance at the gaming table seemed to have greatly affected him. Mr. Jacobs, the well-informed gentleman whom I had met the other day in the bar-room, turned out to be a lawyer, and was fully acquainted with the nature of events happening in Cedarville. I decided to call upon him the following morning in order to make inquiries about Mrs. Hammond and her son. I first asked him if he knew Mrs. Hammond, to which he replied, "Oh, I know her well. She's one of my best friends." He didn't mention Willie's name, so I asked, "Is Willie her only child?" He gave a heavy sigh, and then revealed his misgivings. "He is her only living child. She has had 4, another son and 2 daughters, but they all died young, and it would have been better for her, and for Willie too, if he'd joined them in that better world above." "His lifestyle greatly upsets her," I observed. "He's destroying her reason," Mr. Jacobs said with emphasis. "She idolised him. No mother ever loved her son more than Mrs. Hammond loved her beautiful and talented Willie. Her love and care for him was such she wouldn't let him leave her side. Not until the time he went to school. He was always with her. I never saw him show the slightest desire for anyone else but his mother. But as you know, that hasn't lasted. The great wide world was out there, and he was drawn to go out. Oh, how his mother trembled with fear when he left her side. She saw the dangers that surrounded his path, and she was consumed by her worries. Oh, but all her fears were nothing compared to what he became. When Willie was 18, he went to college to read law. I never saw a young man so promising, but he had a dangerous talent. It was an unusual verbal skill combined with fluency of argument. Everyone who came into his company was enchanted by him, and his wealth attracted a circle of younger men, not all of whom were of the best character. However, his pure tendencies and honourable principles kept him safe. I do not doubt that social influences alone would not have dragged him off the right path if Slade hadn't opened this damnable inn. "But you had a pub here before the Black Lion opened," I said. "Oh, yes, we did. But it was poorly kept and attracted few customers to the bar-room. None of the gentry of Cedarville would go there. It was no temptation for one born into Willie's circle. But the opening of the Black Lion began a new era. Judge Hammond, who I fear is not the purest man in the world himself, gave his support to the venture and spoke of Simon Slade as an entrepreneurial and praiseworthy man. Then Judge Lyman took it up. Another gentleman from Cedarville would visit here, and so the Black Lion became known as a respectable place. Every hour of the day and night you would see the town's most promising young men going in and out, and talking hand in hand with the innkeeper. He felt glad to be accepted after being a miller, who had been promoted to an important man, who now mixed with the best in Cedarville. Willie went along with all this. His friends became worried that he was getting too fond of drinking, as he took to it madly. The fiery poison dazzled his mind and dimmed his better instincts. His father treated his actions lightly and indifferently. I heard him claim that it was only the morning flame of a lifetime, and that Willie would cool down when he grew up a little. His mother saw it quite differently. She was horrified and perplexed at his behaviour. She spoke to him, counselling him to stop his corrupt ways, but he laughed at her for her trouble. This went on for month after month, year after year, until Willie was the subject of everyone's gossip. To try and turn his mind to a new direction, his father bought the old Slade mill. Willie was to run it and manage the money. You know the result. This greatly affected Mrs. Hammond. No one knows what she suffered. She spent a fortnight without sleep, walking constantly back and forth in her room, until she finally fell into a heavy slumber. When she awoke, she'd lost her reason. Now she never quite knows what is going on around her. Didn't this outcome scare the young man away from his disreputable behaviour, I asked. No, although he loved his mother and was greatly troubled about her, it seemed he couldn't stop himself. There was a madness raging inside him. When he tried to change for the better, and I don't doubt he did try, when he met any of his old company, he fell back into his old ways. The road he took to the mill went past the door of the Black Lion, and it wasn't easy for him to pass without being dragged into the bar. Whether it was his lust for the drink, or the instigation of a kind companion hanging around the pub which tempted him, the result was the same. I think there might have been something more than drink enticing him in, I said. What? I told him briefly what I had seen the previous night. Oh, yes, I was afraid so. I half suspected that he had fallen under Green's spell, but I hoped it was only the drink. What you say amazes me, Mr. Jacobs said, moving excitedly. I was worried that I might have been part of the crowd who encouraged Willie Hammond, but his downfall is no longer a mystery. Oh, Father in heaven! Is this how our young men are led into temptation? Is this how the old enemy casts his nets? Oh my, it's appalling, it's horrific! The man was greatly troubled, and went on for a while in this agitated way. I'm incensed by this issue, he said. Who can contemplate these things without being upset? While he was speaking, Judge Hammond, Willie's father, came in. He looked in a pitiful state. He took Mr. Jacobs outside for several minutes to talk. I could see his face, though I couldn't hear what they said. His expression was painful to look at, showing the inscrutable tortures of his mind. Mr. Jacobs came back into the office, and I heard Judge Hammond say, "Try to see him, will you?" as he was leaving the offices. "I'll go at once," the lawyer replied. "Bring him home, if possible." "I'll try." Judge Hammond bowed politely and hastily left. "Do you know Green's room number?" asked Jacobs, as soon as Hammond left. "Yes, number 11, I said. "Willie hasn't been home since last night. His father now also suspects Green of being a gambler. He only realised yesterday. His son, of all his experiences, he says drives him crazy. He wants me to go to the Black Lion, as his lawyer, to try to find Willie. Did you see anything of him this morning?" "I didn't see him," I replied. "Or Green?" "No." "Was Slade around when you left the pub?" "I saw nothing of him either." What Judge Hammond fears may all be too true. He thinks this fraudster is trying to suck up as much as he can before making off with it. The young man must have been well taken in by him if he didn't go home last night. Did you mention that to his father?" "No, that would have done no good, and only upset him more. He's troubled enough already. But time is passing, and there's nothing to lose. Will you come with me?" I went with him to the pub. Together we went into the bar. 2 or 3 men were drinking at the counter. "Is Mr. Green around here?" Mr. Jacobs asked Matthew, the barman. "I didn't see him down here." "Is he in his room?" "I can't say." "Will you check, please?" "I will." "Frank," Matthew said, talking to the innkeeper's son who was lying on a bench, "go and check if Mr. Green is in his room." "Go yourself, I'm not your servant," came Frank's rude reply. "I'll find out for you, sir," Matthew said politely, and went upstairs to look for Green, leaving the customers at the bar. As Matthew left the bar-room, Frank sniffed, and went over and mixed a glass of liquor, which he downed in one. I thought it was a dangerous habit for such a young man, and Mr. Jacobs seemed to agree as he stared hard at the boy. The only answer he got was a wicked look back, much as to say, "It's none of your business." Matthew came back. "He's not there," he said. "Are you sure?" Jacobs asked. Yes, sir. Something in his manner caused us to doubt him. We went out of the room and consulted together. We decided that Matthew's word could not be trusted. What's to be done? Mr. Jacobs said. Let's go to Green's room, I answered, and knock on the door. If he's there, he will have to respond, rather than ignoring us. Show me the room, Jacobs said. I led him to number 11. He knocked gently, but there was no reply. He knocked again, more loudly, but all was quiet. Again and again he knocked, but the only sound was his own knocking. There's no one in, he said, turning to me. We went down the stairs, and when we got to the bottom we met Mrs. Slade. During this visit to Cedarville, I had not seen her face to face. Oh, what a shocking sight she was! Her easy-going and beautiful face was now hollow and harsh. Her formerly upright and attractive body was crooked and deformed. It was like looking at a mirror of sadness. Have you seen Mr. Green this morning? I asked. He hasn't come down from his room yet, she replied. Are you sure? Mr. Jacobs asked. I knocked on his door several times. He didn't answer. What do you want from him? Asked Mrs. Slade, looking him in the eye. I'm looking for Willie Hammond, and he is said to be with Green, Jacobs said. Knock twice gently, then knock 3 times heavier, said Mrs. Slade, as she slipped past to go upstairs. Will you come with me? Mr. Jacobs said to me. I didn't object, because although I had no legal right to intervene in the matter, my feelings about the case were strong. I went without thinking about what I was doing. Jacobs knocked the door. As Mrs. Slade had said, this time got a direct answer. The door opened slowly, and the unkempt face of Simon Slade appeared. Mr. Jacobs, he said, surprised at seeing my friend. Do you want to see me? No, sir. I wish to see Mr. Green, said Jacobs, pushing the door wide open. The ones I had seen on the previous night were there. Green, Willie Hammond, Judge Lyman, and Slade. On the table where the other 3 were sitting were cards, pieces of paper, writing utensils, and a pile of banknotes. On another small table by their side were a set of decanters and glasses. Judge Lyman, how is this possible? Mr. Jacobs said. I didn't expect to see you here. Green swept his hands across the face of the table, trying to secure the money and bills. But before he could, Willie Hammond grabbed 3 or 4 narrow papers and ripped them up. You cursed devilish rogue! Green shouted fiercely, pressing his hand to his bosom as if he were making a supplication. He had scarcely uttered the words when Hammond rushed at him with the ferocity of a tiger, knocking him to the ground. Before the stunned onlookers could intervene, Willie's hands grabbed the gambler's throat. Green went red in the face as Willie strangled him. Call me a devilish rogue, would you? Said Hammond, foaming at the mouth. Me, who you hunted down in a bloodthirsty, remorseless and hell-bent way? Forgive me, I have nothing of any worth left in the world, so what have I to be afraid of? I will do one last good deed for society before I die. With a mighty effort, Green struggled out of Willie's grasp, but the boy rushed after the gambler with fresh fury and vigour. But Green drew his knife, and as Hammond rushed him, he buried the blade in him. Faster than lightning, Green pulled out the blade and stuck it in again before anyone could stop him. Willie gave a heavy sigh and collapsed. Blood poured from his side as the assassin stood back. In the terror and tumult that followed, Green ran from the room. The doctor was called without delay, and he made a thorough examination. The wounds are fatal, he said, shaking his head. There's nothing I can do except make him as comfortable as possible. Someone ran to tell the boy's father about the terrible events, and he came quickly. He was greatly distressed. Indeed, I have never seen such terrible grief on a man's face. The quietest of all the company was Willie himself. He didn't take his eyes off his father's face. Are you in great pain, my boy? The old man whispered as he knelt over his son, his long hair falling over the victim's damp cheeks. The pain's not too bad, father, came the weak answer. Don't tell mother just yet. I'm afraid it will kill her. What could the father answer? Nothing. He was dumb. Does she know about this? The dying boy asked, a desperate look passing over his face. But as Judge Hammond shook his head, I heard a distressing cry come from the bottom of the stairs. Thoughtless gossips had already carried news of the impending death to his mother. "My poor mother," said Willie, as his father wiped his pale face. "Who told her about this?" Judge Hammond set off towards the noise, but before he could stop her, the deranged woman burst through the door. "Oh, Willie, Willie, my boy, my boy!" she cried in a moaning voice, which melted all the hearts hearing it. She hugged and kissed him with extraordinary tenderness. "Oh, my mother, my dear mother," Willie said, staring up into her loving face, as if his soul were boiling over with fondness for her. "Oh, Willie, 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 my son," she said, kissing him again. Mr. Hammond tried to separate them, lest his son be adversely affected. "Don't, father," said Willie. "Let her be. I'm not upset. I'm glad she's with me." "Don't try to speak," said the mother, gently placing her fingers on his lips. There was silence for a few seconds, apart from his mother weeping and moaning miserably. "Ma'am, are you here?" Willie glanced round the room wildly. "Yes, dear Willie, here I am. I can't see mother. It's so dark. Oh, mother, mother!" he shouted suddenly. She hugged him to her bosom. "Stay with me, stay with me!" His mother hugged him more tightly. The doctor came forward, fearing the consequences, and tried to get her to release her arms, but he was unsuccessful. "He's dead," I heard the doctor whisper, and the words sent a cold chill through my blood. They also reached Judge Hammond's ears, and he let out an enormous sigh. "Who says he's dead?" the mother asked despairingly, as she laid her boy down from her arms onto the bed. Her face looked as pale as his dead face. She let out one big cry as she realized what the doctor had said was true, and then she fell forward across her son's dead body. Everyone in the room thought that Mrs. Hammond had fainted from despair, but a few seconds proved this was not so. Her knowledge of her son's death had come to her so suddenly that it had deprived her of her life. Oh, what a scene! Mother and son lying dead in each other's arms. "Where has Green gone?" I asked. That's the end of the episode of 10 Nights in the Black Lion, written by Daniel Owen. It was first published in the magazine Charles Bala on September the 8th, 1859, and this episode was signed for the first time. The signature was Glasslewin, which is Daniel Owen's bardic name. I'm Robert Lomas, and I've spent the last year translating this. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please click the subscribe box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen.